1961, the Berlin Wall is built. The city is divided along communist and non-communist lines. Wallenberg becomes part of a Cold War cat-and-mouse game. In 1961, Soviet dissident Yuri Bello claims Wallenberg is alive. He is in a psychiatric clinic, punishment for staging a hunger strike. That same year, a Soviet professor named Alexander Myashnikov says he examined Wallenberg in a mental hospital. But Myashnikov later retracts his statement after being put under pressure by Soviet President Nikita Khrushchev. In 1980, Greville Wynne, a British spy who had been jailed by the KGB during the 60s, recalls a strange experience.
It was early 1963, that I was in Lubyanka on one occasion, taking exercise. They have several pens there. And one morning, as the guard was bringing a new man in, he shouted, "Taxi." Now, this might seem strange, but there's a horrible cage which they bring you up and take you down in. And I think this is a kind of keeping the spirit some sense of humor. About 5 days later, the similar thing happened as I was being led into my exercise pen. And I heard the word taxi in a discussion with the guard, which I knew was not a German accent, but seemed a Scandinavian accent. I shouted, I said, "Are you American?" And he said, "No, I'm Swedish." And with that, the guard put a hand over my mouth and pushed me into the cage.
No other Swedish prisoner was noted in Lubyanka during the same period. It is tantalizing news. The Soviet Union stonewalls any further requests. In 1979, Wallenberg's mother dies. But the family will not give up. Wallenberg's half-sister, Nina Lagergren, and his half-brother, Guy von Dardel, continue to ask questions.
There is no convincing evidence that he is dead, and as long as there is not that, I think we have to work as if he is still alive. I mean, that's our duty to him. We cannot let him sit in a Soviet prison for indefinitely on the assumption that he is dead. The second thing is, of course, that we have a number of witnesses who have come up at various times during these 40 years and given quite conclusive evidence that he was alive all through the 50s, all through the 60s. The last published testimony is from 75, but we have further evidence after that, which, however, we cannot give any details about.
1984. Mikhail Gorbachev is the Soviet president. The Cold War begins to thaw. He initiates a new policy called glasnost, meaning openness, and examines past Soviet crimes. This should include the Wallenberg case.
Well, we know that he was alive, and the Soviet government, as a matter of fact, has admitted that he was alive in the late 40s. We do think that we have quite good evidence that he was alive in the late 50s and even later on.
1989. Nina Lagergren and Guy von Dardel are invited to Moscow. They visit Vladimir prison.
We are very optimistic, and we're hopeful that it will be possible to get him released.
Wallenberg's passport and other personal effects are handed over. Some believe he may have recently died. Soviet TV makes a plea for witnesses to come forward who may have met Wallenberg in prison. The phone lines at the TV station light up. Numerous Russian prisoners assert that Wallenberg is still alive.
They try to convince us of their openness and their human attitude, and we got these belongings after so long, 45 years. So we are, and they promised to go into our material. So we absolutely hope that it's developing.
Despite this new openness, the official Soviet answer remains the same. Wallenberg died of a heart attack in 1947 in Lubyanka prison. They say his ashes are buried in this Moscow cemetery, along with other unnamed victims murdered by Stalin. But his name is not forgotten.
Americans will never forget that by a special act of Congress, our country has officially adopted a remarkable Swede, a hero of moral and humane people the world over. I refer to Raoul Wallenberg, the Swedish diplomat who in the Second World War saved hundreds of thousands from the Nazi terror. That Wallenberg is now a citizen of both our countries is a bond between us and should be an inspiration to our peoples. Let us join in insisting that if there is a new openness in the Soviet Union, the Soviet leadership give the world an accounting of this moral giant, Raoul Wallenberg.
British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher also honors Wallenberg at a ceremony in Budapest. Throughout the 1980s, Ronald Reagan exerts military power over the Soviet Union. By 1989, the pressure is felt. The Berlin Wall comes down. It is the first hit in the Soviet Union's fall. It is now time to find answers to Wallenberg's disappearance. New Year's Day, 1990. The Cold War enters its final stage. The Soviet Empire collapses. Berliners are free. They are joined by other Eastern Europeans also celebrating the overthrow of communist rule. But for Raoul Wallenberg, it is too late. The Russians declare he is long dead. But there are others who assert he is the victim of a massive cover-up. Erwin Kotler chairs an international inquiry. He rejects the Soviet claim, saying it is likely Wallenberg was still alive in the 50s and 60s.
The one agency whose cooperation is necessary, but has not yet been forthcoming, is the KGB. And we are hopeful that perhaps what will resonate from this summit may unlock that final mystery.
The Soviet government responds with its own investigation. The KGB fails to find any missing documents. It disputes the testimony of freed Soviet prisoners. But life for the KGB is almost over. 1991, Gorbachev is ousted. The Soviet Union is at an end, and so is the Cold War. In 1992, a joint Swedish-Russian investigation begins a 9-year search of former Soviet KGB archives. 2001, Russia issues a statement. Stalin had Wallenberg shot dead in the Lubyanka prison on July 17, 1947. Sweden disagrees, saying there is no death certificate or other documents to prove this. For all they know, he could still be alive. The Russian authorities are adamant. Alexander Yakovlev heads a commission that works with Stalin's victims. He says a former KGB chief told him that Wallenberg had been shot. Sweden is embarrassed by some of the emerging truth. Some say Sweden's reluctance to offend Stalin stopped the government from pressing harder for Wallenberg's release. And there is an even more disturbing allegation. In 1964, Moscow offered to swap Wallenberg for Soviet defectors, but Sweden turned this down. Sweden even held a Soviet spy, Colonel Stig Wennerström. He could have been traded back to the Soviet Union, but no deal was struck. The revelation is startling. Swedish Prime Minister Göran Persson apologizes for these past mistakes. But why did Stalin have Wallenberg killed? What threat could such a peaceful man pose? At first, it seems clear that Soviet authorities in Hungary feared that Wallenberg might be a spy. This explains his initial arrest. By the time he is moved to Lubyanka prison, it seems likely that his jailers knew that he wasn't a spy. But it was too late. As an articulate foreigner from a neutral country, it seems likely that the Soviet regime feared that Wallenberg might complain about his false imprisonment. Having spent 2 years in Lubyanka prison, interrogated and tortured, the Soviets could not release Wallenberg to a world hungry for stories of communist atrocities. It is a tragic irony. Having survived the worst of Hitler's Third Reich and having saved thousands of Jews, Wallenberg becomes one of the first high-profile victims of Stalin's post-war paranoia. 2001, Vladimir Ustinov, Russia's state prosecutor, apologizes for Wallenberg's death. Today, all around the world, memorials are raised in Wallenberg's memory. In New York, in London, in Israel, there is a special place of remembrance for Wallenberg. At Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem, his half-brother plants a tree in Wallenberg's memory. Survivor Yehudit Yaron comments on Wallenberg.
Why did he do it? Of course, the easiest thing was to come up with a romantic story, and we were looking for who was he in love with. Perhaps there is a Jewish woman or a beautiful young girl or something. But we never found such a thing. It was his humanity and compassion.
He was a common man of uncommon courage. Fate forced him to make a choice, and ultimately, he paid the price.
Ultimately, he fell victim to the incredulity of the Soviets who took Budapest then, who arrested him because they just couldn't believe that a Swedish diplomat would dedicate himself for months to this job.
But his decision, his willingness to risk his own life to help others, resulted in his saving 100,000 lives.
He is what we call in our tradition one of the righteous men. A Christian who risked his life to save Jewish lives.
We will probably never know Raoul Wallenberg's true story, but his determination shines through the mystery surrounding his fate. To this day, he leaves an untarnished legacy as one of the heroes of World War II.